Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Andrea Sellers, and I am the Assistant Director for Regional Engagement. And I want to thank you all for joining us on behalf of the NC State Alumni Association. This is your friendly reminder to please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to submit any questions you may have for our panelists or our co-moderators tonight. And then a recording of this webinar will be available about 48 hours after the completion of the session, posted to YouTube and sent out after the fact. This will be a 75-minute webinar, and I am so excited to introduce to you all tonight Lyndenise Berdecia. Lyndenise is a proud alumna of NC State's Poole College of Management and has served as a PAC Partners representative for South Florida for over 11 years. She also serves as the co-chair for the Latinx Alumni Network and supports the Poole Diversity Fund and initiatives. After her time at NC State, Lyndenise went on to get her master's in international political economy from the University of Miami. She has in-depth knowledge on the college recruiting process and has presented on topics including recruiting and retaining students of color, Latinx students at HBCUs, and digital marketing and higher ed. Additionally, she serves as the founder and chief educator at Birdhouse. In her experience in business development, career coaching, creative strategy, digital marketing, and higher education seems just about unmatched. And we are, as she would say, so excited to have her and all her doing the most. But thank you for joining us, Lyndenise.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And welcome, everyone. Really excited to be here. And of course, to introduce Dr. Nacoste. NC State's Dr. Rupert Nacoste teaches a widely popular psychology course called Interpersonal Relationships and Race. His new book, To Live Woke, uses his experiences from growing up in segregated Louisiana to serving in the US Navy to help us understand that we need to interact with people who are not like us, whether because of race, religion, sexual orientation, or any number of differences. So we'll be treated tonight with reading and great questions from Dr. Nacoste. So thank you, Dr. Nacoste, for your time.
Thank you, Lyndenise, for being my co-facilitator tonight. And my thanks again to the Alumni Association for sponsoring this series that gives us a forum in which to explore the challenges of neodiversity. We're living in an important intergroup transition moment in American history. We all know this, but I know this in an intimate way. Since mid-June, with the publication of my book, I have done about 30 Zoom presentations and conversations about neodiversity. All manner of groups have called on me in the midst of what I call the COVID-19 woke effect. With the hideous murder of Mr. George Floyd in the midst of the social isolation created by the pandemic, America has been forced to look closely at and been startled into a new awareness of the sometimes brutal intergroup dynamics that have been a constant in the lives of African Americans. Cutting across all the group identities of American culture, that new startled awareness has activated a hunger to understand and do something to help end racism. That is where I and my concept of neodiversity can help people find productive ways of thinking and acting in this new intergroup context. Community groups that include the Durham Junior League, church groups like St. Andrew's Presbyterian Race and Reconciliation Committee, academic groups like Duke's Global Health Working Group, North Carolina State University's Wellness Program, not to mention corporate groups like Carey's Workplace Options or Birmingham, Alabama's Hometown Lenders have called on me. What is important is that this is really an opportunity in our history to talk honestly about all of the us versus them tensions going on in America today. As you are becoming aware, my book, To Live Woke, touches on most of the troubling social interaction dynamics tearing at the soul of America. For example, just in the chapters for this third meeting, if you're interested in and concerned about the power of racial slurs, there are 2 chapters about that in my book. Still in this section of chapters, if you are concerned and interested in the language used to talk about people with mental health conditions, or the language used to talk about people with visible physical limitations, there are chapters about these language issues in To Live Woke. In upcoming sections of the book, there are chapters on student protests, on the calling the police phenomenon, and more. If it sounds like this book is too broad and scattershot, it is not. I explore a lot of topics, but they are linked by my idea of neodiversity. Neodiversity is America's new interpersonal situation in which we all have to encounter and sometimes interact with people not like us on some group dimension. People who sometimes do not look like, sometimes do not sound like, sometimes do not believe like, sometimes do not love like us. Neodiversity can cause some people to experience anxiety about how to interact, and anxiety that can come out in behavior in a lot of different ways, including anger, withdrawal, attempts to ensure the interaction is smooth by relying on stereotypes, including treating people as a representative of a group. That neodiversity link to all those possibilities is why more than a few people have read my book and asked me if I am a prophet. I am not. I am, however, a trained and careful social observer of social change. As a social psychologist, my observations of ongoing social change led me to develop the concept of neodiversity, to capture all the interpersonal, intergroup changes I saw on and off the NC State campus. That meant that people had to learn how to interact with lots of people not like them. Turns out those changes and opportunities for intergroup contact have been happening all across our country and causing intergroup anxiety that comes out in a lot of different ways that my idea of neodiversity can be used to analyze. One of the most powerful questions I am being asked is this: is there a relationship between neodiversity anxiety and the lack of empathy we are seeing in America? Neodiversity anxiety mistakes is the theme of the chapters for our meeting this week. Turns out the chapters on neodiversity anxiety mistakes are about the social disconnect and lack of empathy that can be activated in neodiverse social interactions. With the empathy question in mind, tonight I'm going to read a bit of chapter 21, Jokes and Pokes About Other Folks, and a bit of chapter 22, They Have Feelings Too. Chapter 21, Jokes and Pokes About Other Folks. What do you tell a woman with two black eyes? That's the first line of a so-called joke. Joking is a social interaction strategy that people use to do a variety of things. Sure, even Freud would say that sometimes a joke is not just a joke. I myself love punctuation jokes. A panda bear walks into a bear, eats, shoots, and leaves. Yes, sometimes a joke is just a joke. Even so, sometimes a joke is used in an attempt to reduce interpersonal tension between people who are interacting with each other. Sometimes, too, a joke or comment is used to make a social commentary. In 21st century America, interpersonal tension and social commentary are both often motivated by neodiversity anxiety. Neodiversity is this new interpersonal situation all Americans now live in, a situation where every day we all have encounters and sometimes interactions with people from many different groups by way of sex, bodily condition, gender identity, and on and on. For some, that situation brings out a neodiversity anxiety that activates prejudice and bigotry. Since 2008 and the election of President Barack Hussein Obama, in America, we have had too many instances of racial or religious or gender bigotry go viral. I truly believe that most of us want to interact well with the people who come into our social circles of work or play. Although there is prejudice and bigotry in America, I do not believe we are a nation of bigots. But some Americans haven't figured out what it means to be living in the 21st century. Some actually think it means I can joke however I want until they crash into reality, sometimes with a really loud social media bang. Hoisted on their own Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Snapchat post, the perpetrators always claim, we were just kidding. It was just a joke. But here's the thing. Nowadays, and too often, a joke is used to camouflage anti-group feelings, that is, prejudice. An Italian joke is not just a joke. It is divisive and hurtful. A blonde joke is not just a joke. It is divisive and hurtful. A joke about women is not just a joke. It's divisive and hurtful. A joke about violence against women is more than divisive and hurtful. It is demeaning and dangerous. With good reason, you might wonder though, who would joke about violence against women? Turns out far too many college males think these jokes are funny. And not only do some college males think such jokes are funny, they are so confident that these jokes are acceptable, they will tell such a joke to a female classmate. A female student in my interpersonal relationships and race course wrote a paper about a time a male classmate told her a joke. She wrote this. In this particular class, there was one guy that I got to know pretty well, but it was strictly a classroom interpersonal relationship. To elaborate, we joked around a lot, but one moment in particular caught me way off guard, and to this day I am a little frustrated with my own response of laughing in an effort not to seem uptight. But let me tell you about the interaction. I can't remember why the class was so relaxed that day. I think we had just gotten back a test and we were waiting to go over the answers. This young man made a comment about something. To this day, I still don't know what he said, and I couldn't hear him. After asking him twice what he said, he looked at me and asked, "What do you tell a woman with two black eyes?" My response, simply enough, I don't know. "Nothing," he said. "You already told her twice." And then he laughed in my face as it turned red from embarrassment. How could a college-educated male, how could any mature male think this was funny and acceptable enough to tell a female peer? For that matter, how could any adult think this was funny and acceptable to tell anyone, woman or not? If you're wondering, as I was wondering, if you're asking yourself how a person could be so oblivious to think that these kinds of jokes are okay, here's your answer from chapter 22. They have feelings too. Really? At the end of the semester of teaching, I always have things to ponder. Fall 2015 semester, I was reflecting on a theme that jumped out at me from the one new thought papers my students had written in my sophomore level course, Introduction to Social Psychology. From the beginning to the end of that course, I used social psychology to describe and explain the causes of relationship development, maintenance, and failure. To focus their end of term papers, I asked students to describe their one new thought about interpersonal relationships they have had as a result of taking the course with me. I read all 200 of the one-page papers, and from them I pull quotes that turn into my Young Love lecture. That is the last formal lecture I give to every class. Having gone through that process at the end of fall 2015, I sat at my desk editing and cleaning the lecture document. I do this to turn the document file into a PDF that I send to my students at the end of the class as a parting gift. Looking the Young Love lecture over one more time, I was quite struck again by the number of papers that had to do with the theory of mind. For a person to have a theory of mind means the person is aware of and thinks about the fact that other people have thoughts, feelings, and preferences too. For far too many of my students, that was a new thought. It was a revelation to too many of my fall 2015 students that other people have thoughts, preferences, and feelings too. One student wrote, "Sometimes it's easy to forget about the other person's thoughts and feelings and get carried away in your own emotions. Now I can see that understanding the theory of mind has enhanced my thinking when it comes to interpersonal conflict. I have to understand that people on the other side of that tension have feelings too." Imagine that. And then think about what that means. College students, intergroup behavior these days are loud and dreadful. Jokes about a person's sex, bodily condition, gender identity, race, religion, mental health condition, or sexual orientation. Those kinds of jokes are told by college students with a shocking casualness. Halloween has become a celebration used to mock, to make fun of them. But the students making the jokes, wearing blackface or wearing fake mustaches and sombreros, are caught off guard when strong objections come their way. Why? Well, it never occurred to them that other people would not see and interpret their actions the same way they do, as harmless, what's the big deal fun. Surely they seem to think everyone sees the world the way I see the world. Yes, the jokes and costumes are forms of bigotry, yet not always bigotry rooted only in anti-group prejudice, but sometimes bigotry rooted in an immature theory of mind, or bigotry rooted in a theory of mind that does not include the perspective of people not in my group. Imagine being that oblivious to all the neurodiversity around you. Imagine that in neurodiverse America, a theory of mind that does not attempt to include the perspective of people not like me is faulty and maladaptive. To always default to people like me is why we get so many angry protestations about political correctness. For a person whose theory of mind has people like me as the default means for that person, having to take account of the thoughts, feelings, and preferences of them takes too much effort. In fact, it's not even considered to be legitimate. With that one group theory of mind, the thoughts, feelings, and preferences of those others are not real, not authentic, and maybe not human. The only reason I have to watch my language is all this political correctness bull. Too immature, sad, and dangerous. Yet all is not lost. Once they have learned the theory of mind concept, my mostly 19 and 20-year-old sophomore students come to realize it's not about political correctness, but about respect. One wrote, one concept from the course that has gone hand in hand with Dr. Nacoste's phrase, people do not just spring into existence just because you get interested, is the concept of the theory of mind. Though both of those may seem like common sense ideas that everyone should know, I believe that many people do not quite grasp those concepts. If more people would attempt to understand these two ideas, they would realize that other humans are just like them, human. I know that since understanding these two concepts, my interactions have been enhanced. I now understand that the person looking back at me is just a person like me. Do notice the realization that a more inclusive theory of mind is something for the person to work on, to develop in order to live well in our neoliberalist world. Too many Americans are fighting against that self-development by railing against perceived political correctness. About that, one student wrote, the theory of mind definition has helped me to better acknowledge where people come from and to be accepting of people for who they are. Knowing about the theory of mind will help me better understand the new people I meet. Instead of getting frustrated with them or cutting myself off from them, I will try to understand their beliefs and desires. Clearly not about political correctness. That is about having a theory of mind in line with our neoliberous nation and world. One mistake people are making today is the mistake of believing that adjustment to university life is easy. Truth is, modern university life is filled with situations in which young people have no choice but to encounter a rambunctious, neoliberous mix of other humans by way of race, religion, sex of person, mental health condition, and on and on. Yet no one prepares young people for the day-to-day encounters they must have with neodiversity. And that lack of preparation puts them in situations they find anxiety-provoking. About that, one of my students wrote, while listening to our lecture about neodiversity, I realized that there are so many other groups besides race that you can be socially unfamiliar with, creating multiple situations of neodiversity anxiety. I also realized that I have been mistaking the idea of being accepting of cultural diversity with empathy when it comes to my personal qualities. What creates the difference is that I don't interact with many people or groups of people I am unfamiliar with. I'm not prejudiced against these groups of people, but I have neodiversity anxiety. In my lifetime, I haven't been exposed to a lot of different groups of people who I encounter at this university. Due to this, I don't know how to interact with people extremely different from me or what I am used to. As a result, I tend to unintentionally avoid those who I don't know how to interact with. I never realized I did that until our lecture on neodiversity. So all is not lost. Coming to realize what is really going on gives a person the opportunity for self-development, to work on expanding their theory of mind. One of my students wrote, Dr. Nacoste, what you said in lecture on neodiversity anxiety genuinely enlightened me. Your words reminded me that we are all people. We are just people. At the end of the day, nobody is better than anybody. The idea that we all are longing to connect with people and belong shows that there is no reason to be afraid of anybody, because we are going to miss out on opportunities if we all shy away from each other. When neodiversity anxiety starts to rise up in you, I tell my students, just remember that this person who does not look like, sound like, or believe like you is just another student, just another human being. To be able to do that, though, my students have to work on developing a theory of mind that gives respect to the humanity of those other people who also have thoughts, feelings, and preferences. It is my belief that all Americans need to work on developing their mature quality in their own theory of mind.
Thank you so much. I wish I wish we had everyone on the video so we can all do snaps, and I'm sure everyone is doing it on the back end. I think that it's very powerful. You know, you've touched on so many different points, from, you know, jokes that people, as you mentioned, like a joke about a woman is not just a joke, or a joke about a group is not just a joke. And, you know, I shared with you before that I wanted to share a few of my stories as well. And it does include my experience at NC State. And so I actually graduated from NC State in 2006, but I transferred as a second-year student from Puerto Rico. And during my business classes, so I'm a proud graduate of Poole College. You know, one of the senior level courses that I took back then, I don't know if they still do it now, instead of orientation, we would have the African American Symposium. And that's where I found my home in Witherspoon, and with the organizations that were really focused on students of color. And so, you know, one of the business strategy classes that I was in my senior year, of course, I was sitting in the front with one of my closest friends who was also, she's African American, and we were sitting in the front. And in one of the strategy classes, the discussion was about globalization. And, you know, we were discussing, you know, some homework and some readings and so on. And a student decided to raise his hand, and he said, well, you know, the only thing that Mexicans are good for is picking tomatoes from my father's farm. And at that moment, like, you know, I felt angry, you know, like my legs started shaking. It was one of these moments that, you know, for someone that's coming from out of state, from someone that, you know, had to work 5 different jobs just to try to pay rent and just really try to feel like I belonged at NC State, that moment was very pivotal in my experience there. And so I let him finish, you know, what he was saying, and I raised my hand. And I know at the moment, like I was, you know, what do I do? Like, how do I position this in a way that he will take it seriously, and it's not necessarily feeding into any type of stereotype, which you know, you speak to. And so, you know, I raised my hands, and I know that my friend, she put her hand on my knee because she could feel, you know, it was a moment, you know, because it's like one of those, like they say, you could go from 0 to 100. Well, yeah. 110, right? And so, you know, I raised my hand and I said, well, excuse me, do you not see who your peers are? And I said, and at the end of the day, and I know that you mentioned this at some of the talks that you've had, and even at orientation, convocation, where you say, you know, we are no longer based on our gender. We are no longer, you know, based on where we're from. We are no longer based on our academic backgrounds. When we step on this campus, we're all Wolfpack, right?
Everybody's Wolfpack.
Exactly. And so, you know, I tried to explain that to him that, you know, we are all here, like we all play an important role. Should it be economically? Should it be socially? Not just here domestically, but also on an international scale. And so, you know, I felt that at that moment, I was hoping to, you know, plant some seeds. And I know that you also, you know, speak about this, that maybe I didn't change their mind and change their perception at that moment.
Right.
But I also felt that it was a missed opportunity from the professor.
Can I talk?
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll just mention. So I looked at the professor, waiting for the professor to say something. And he dismissed the class because he was so uncomfortable. Oh. And so I want to open that up. I wanted to share that with you because I'm hoping that things have changed, but at the same time, you know, I would love to get your feedback from not just how to interact in that situation, but also what's the professor's role and how can we count on professors to step up?
So there's a lot of stuff in that story. First, let's start with the theory of mind thing. So this young person, this young man, you said, stands up, has has the audacity to say something like that without thinking about other people's thoughts, feelings, and preferences too. That's that whole thing about the theory of mind. his theory of mind was very enclosed, very narrow. He thought that was a reasonable thing to say, which means he had never had that idea challenged before he came to campus Okay, second thing, a student says something like that in a university class. It is absolutely the professor's responsibility to take that question and in a civil way, but an academic way, reframe that thing. That's a responsibility that a professor has. Now, the problem is most universities, ours included, have not done any kind of job with preparing professors for neurodiversity. They just haven't done it. So professors come from wherever they've come, and none of them are trained in dealing with sensitive topics. I can say that with some confidence. And so what that means is we just let them loose in the classroom and stuff happens and a professor does what that professor did. He knew this was all wrong, but all he could do was say, I'll see y'all tomorrow. Well, that's unprofessional, irresponsible, and hurtful to the whole class, not just you. The whole class is now left with this thing in their head that the professor, the faculty member, has not addressed in any way in the context of that course.
And so it's clearly something that has never left my mind. And so, and yeah, it's clear, clear as day because, so many times, especially during that period, because, I come from, as they say, an ethnic background, they're quick to like group and, make the assumption that everyone is Mexican or from a certain background, right? And which I think that also goes back to the point where, I never really mixed with other or interacted with other groups. So my excuse is that I try to shy away from it, as one of your students had mentioned.
Yeah.
And thinking about, I know Halloween is coming up and there's also, you discussed a part of your book as well. How would we, this happens a lot with colleges and universities as far as the use of blackface on or off campus parties. And, many times whenever they interview the person or their story comes out, that's their excuse.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I didn't know that it was a bad decision, or I didn't know that was offensive. How would you approach that? Let's say, if this were to happen at NC State, is that something that universities should, discuss, should bring to light? Or is this something that, they should just kind of sweep under the rug?
Okay, very good, thank you. Universities have a real responsibility. We must remember what we are. We're an educational institution. So we're not a business. We have business components, but we're an educational institution. So we should educate. What does that mean? Well, it means that as soon as students come onto our campus, we should start immediately educating them about the fact that this is a neurodiverse place. We use a lot of buzz phrases, diversity and inclusion. What does that mean? What does that mean to a 17, 18, 19-year-old? Unless that's reframed for them or framed in any concrete way, they don't know. So universities are doing a very poor job. I got a couple of things that are running through my head, so let me do them. One, I did convocation. I was the convocation speaker for 2017. And that's when I used that phrase, everybody here's Wolfpack. I literally had 5,000 young people cheering, everybody here's Wolfpack. And then I did a list, Muslim, everybody here's Wolfpack. I did that on purpose because I knew that my university, NC State, was not gonna do anything like that with those 5,000 young people. They were just gonna let them loose. First time I went to convocation, I was absolutely pissed off because they spent 30 or 40 minutes of that teaching them how to cheer. I was so angry because that is the perfect opportunity. But that's not just an NC State problem, that's across higher education. So that's one thing. As soon as they get here, as soon as they come onto campus, they need to be educated about what it means to be here. Second thing is, when these holidays start coming up, because we've now seen the history, there should be emails, to all the students that says, hey, here's a heads up, that stuff is inappropriate. Now you can go ahead and do it, but it's inappropriate, and if it comes back at you, we're not going to support you. See what I just did? We're not going to defend you. So we're letting you know. Now, NC State did this interesting thing a year ago that really surprised me, but I was very pleased by. For given all the conversations people are having around how to use language and defending themselves by saying, I have the right to say these things because the First Amendment gives me that right. NC State sent out a clarification because what the First Amendment says is not what people think it says. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging your freedom of speech. It does not say a business. It does not say a university. It does not say a church can't say, you can't say that in here. That's not what it says. So we can set our own language standards. Okay, so NC State literally sent out to the whole campus this email from the chancellor's office spelling that out. That was the first time I've seen them do anything like that, and that was very important. What I'm saying is the universities can do that all the time.
Well, I hope it certainly continues because I know I'm proud Wolfpack. And again, when I watched that video, that always stood out to me that, you know, we're Wolfpack and on campus, that's how we should be. And, you know, even though I graduated many moons ago, I'm still very much connected to campus. I actually did want to bring in a question from an attendee and says, what do you think about the in-group joking? For example, I have Black friends who make Black jokes, Hispanic friends who make Hispanic jokes, and gay friends that make gay jokes. How does this square with neurodiversity?
It's the same problem, it turns out. What I mean is this. Just because you're a member of the group doesn't mean that the language you use is not demeaning. One of the chapters I have is about the use of the N-word. That is, African Americans believing that I can say this. Well, these words have a history that's not fun, a history of violence, castration, lynching. Just because you're a member of the group doesn't mean that history goes away. So if you do that with African Americans, you can then do that with gay people, lesbian people. You use certain language, and that language attaches to a history where that language came from and was attached to violence. All of that stuff. And so to say that I can say it just because I'm a member of the group doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's not logical. The word still has a meaning that you say you don't mean, but it means that.
And along those lines, you know, there's another story I wanted to share. So a couple of years ago, I work in higher education. So I help colleges and universities recruit students. And so I usually work with those in the Southeast. And so I live in Miami and I drove up to Tallahassee. And I, before meeting with FAMU the following day, I went to grab, a bite to eat at a local restaurant. I sat down and next to me, it was like a 2-seater. And then next to me, there was, for a family of 4. And so as I sit down and I wait for my food, I receive my food and 2 young children came to sit in the table next to me. And the father yelled out, and the restaurant was packed. The father yelled out, "You're not sitting next to that Spanish N-word." Mm-hmm. And all I felt, again, kind of that fire from my toes all the way to my head. And that was another moment where I had to take a pause. And I said, do I respond and essentially prove him right, whatever it is that he's teaching these children about people that look like me? And again, not to say that I represent the group, because I do not. I represent Lyndenise Berdecia. But also to focus on, do I just stand up and leave? And then everyone else that heard that in the restaurant, which happened to be white, at what point can they say, well, this is an opportunity for me to be an ally, which none of that happened. I ended up throwing away my food, honestly, and I left because it was a very uncomfortable situation for me. But again, this happened 2 years ago, in Tallahassee in Florida. So I'd love to, get your feedback as to, how do we handle situations like that? And also for allies that may be listening today or see this on the YouTube channel, what can you do? Of course, not to escalate a situation to make it worse, but really to plant those seeds of acceptance. And like you said, so we have diversity. So there's people that are diverse within the restaurant, but inclusion would be actually making them accepted and making sure that they too have the same, benefits as others. And so I just would love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, one of the first place I'm going to start is with the establishment itself. That is to say, that person felt comfortable saying that in an establishment. Okay, so the allyship there is the establishment's responsibility, not the customers, because they're not interacting with that person. That person just yells it out. So the establishment now has a responsibility. So the first thing we have to do is train establishments to take that as a standard for doing business. Notice what I just said, a standard for doing business. That's one of the things we have to do with reframing this stuff. It's not the idea of them having to be do-gooders. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about how you do business. And so if you want to do business with members, a neurodiverse group, this is a standard you have to have. So we have to start pushing that. Second thing, allies. I always tell people this. If you are in an interaction with someone and they do something like that, you absolutely have not only the responsibility, you have to train yourself to take that responsibility on. Now, there's a way to do it. You don't start yelling at people and all of that. You just say, oh, whoa, excuse me, but I find that kind of language offensive. It hurts me and it hurts my acquaintance, my friend. It hurts me being with this person. Make it interpersonal. And then don't argue. If you're going to interact with me, you're not going to talk that way. If you want to talk that way, I'm walking the hell away. That's how you begin to train people to be an ally. But they have to be in the interaction. People shouldn't just rush up to somebody and start saying, oh, you can't say it. No, don't do that. But that's why I went to the establishment first and then to the pure interpersonal.
Thank you.
Let me say something else. Two stories you've told. People don't seem to, and this is the whole idea of the theory of mind. Both stories you've told, one of the things you have, two things I want to say about that. One is your memory. These things hit us. That's in your memory now because it hits you. The second point about that is people are not thinking that through. They don't have a theory of mind that says, oh, if I say this, I actually hurt someone. And what your stories show us is, in fact, not only do they hurt someone, but it lingers. It carries on. And that's something, if we want to say that we are humane, if we say we believe in human dignity, if we say we are not racist, then that means you need to engage that in your behavior to take so that this kind of thing doesn't have to live in you or me.
Thank you. Yeah, I have lots of stories, but I think that, yeah, but I think that the important thing and one of the reasons why I'm so involved with NC State, I know it was mentioned that I'm the co-chair of the Latinx Alumni Network, which was recently formed. And it's really because it's about creating community. And for those people that may have not had that pleasant experience on campus, what can we do so that, again, we can take all those layers away and say, we're still Wolfpack?
Here I have a comment. So one of the things about graduating, and you know this, as soon as you graduate, the university starts saying, so join the Alumni Association, send us your money. Okay, if you want people to take that seriously, they have to have had a good experience on the campus. They can't have these kind of stories running around in them. You have decided that you want to help the university build communities. Some people walk away going, I ain't never going back. And some of those people end up being millionaires.
Oh, absolutely. But one of the things that really resonated actually this weekend, and I shared this earlier with some of my peers, is that there was someone in the group that in 1996, during Hispanic Heritage or Latinx Heritage Month, which we're currently in, she had written for the technician. It was the first time that she had written, someone from Hispanic Latinx background had written for the technician.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote about her experiences on campus as being a white passing Latinx person, and how people would speak to her because of her last name or speak against her because she had different points of view. And so she had a very negative experience at NC State, but because of the community that we're trying to build and, creating a scholarship and really having these open, dialogue discussions, and I know many of them are here today, she wrote me and she said, I really appreciate that because I still have a lot of healing, but through this community, I'm learning to heal. And so I think there is certainly power in story. There's power in, perspective. And there's also power in saying, well, I'm not going to let that stop me from helping future generations of having an impactful and experience at NC State. And so that brings me to my next question. And I know we have several others from the group. Mm-hmm. But you had mentioned about, we have to keep these things in mind. And one thing that's important, even in communication, I know that you mentioned this in the previous one, it's about listening. And it's also about thinking about how others are going to receive what it is that you're saying or, writing, if it's an email. And, speaking about politics, I know, this is something that's on everyone's minds. Last week, Senator Lindsey Graham said, and I quote, do I believe our cops are systemically racist? No. Do I believe South Carolina is a racist state? No. Let me tell you why. To young people out there, young people of color, young immigrants, this is a great state. But one thing I can say without any doubt is that you can be African American and go to the Senate, but you just have to share our values. He went on to say, if you're young, African American, or an immigrant, you can go anywhere in the state. You just have to be conservative and not liberal. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and, how that ties into, again, this is someone in power. This is someone in position that, makes decisions for not just people in South Carolina, but in the United States. And how, as, if we have, South Carolina residents here, how would we want to have this dialogue with others within our community to something like that?
So here's the thing. One of the problems in America right now, and it's a long-standing problem, is the idea that when people say racism, they put it at the individual level. But prejudice is not bigotry, is not racism. So racism is a system. So when people say the police aren't systemically racist, what they're trying to say is the police person I know is not a racist. Or is not a racist. Okay, that's completely irrelevant. Systemic racism has to do with how the police force has set up its policies, formal and informal. And clearly the informal policies are that you can do just about anything with an African American. They have to give you respect no matter what. Well, that's not America. That's a totalitarian society. That's not where we live. The police serve us, not the other way around. But if you're African American, informally, the police forces have acted as if they're always in charge. I quote later in the book, I quote a policeman who literally says that. Okay, that's systemic racism. So that's the thing to work on. That's why this whole idea and the wording has been awful. People say defund the police. That's okay. What people mean is take some of the resources that are being used by the police to do essentially mental health work and give it to mental health workers who can come. And look, the Navy actually did this. So as soon as people want to say, well, the police, you can't do that because then the police can't do it. Okay, no, that's not true. The Navy did this. We had a shore patrol. We always have a shore patrol. But one component of the shore patrol was human relations shore patrol. I know because I was on it. And I didn't carry a gun. I didn't carry anything like that. But I walked into situations with sailors and negotiated the situation for the betterment of those sailors. So prejudice is not bigotry, is not racism. what the other part of what Senator Graham said is just plain bigotry. You have to have my beliefs. That's what bigotry is. Bigotry is the idea that my group is the better group. That's what supremacy is. And you have to line yourself up with my group. Otherwise, you're not human. You don't belong. He just said it. And that's what we have to attack. We have to make it clear what we know that means. Not what we think it means, what we know it means.
Absolutely, thank you.
And you're right. These are people who are in power. So one of the things I write about later on in the book is the idea that once you understand the difference between prejudice, bigotry, and racism, what that does is it means you now understand what you have to do. That is, you have to attack city policies. You have to go to city meetings. You have to vote. You have to, and that's how we change this thing. As opposed to saying, well, that policeman is a pain in the, who cares? The structure is what you want to reshape.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we have a couple additional questions here. So we have Sam Warren from Black Alumni Society. She was also the moderator for the session. Her question is, we want graduates to stay connected to the university. What ideas do you have to help students, faculty, and staff create a sense of belonging for our current students?
Oh yeah, I've thought a lot about this actually. You know, there are lots of ways people create groups, but what I would like to see is somebody create, let me do it this way, orientations. Now, there are a lot of different ways to do orientations. One of the things I want the university to do, I'm not saying don't do the African-American orientation. I'm not saying that. But I am saying this, add something. What would I add? First generation. What would that do? What would that look like? To bring together all the first generation college students as soon as they get here. Oh, that would turn out to be a neurodiverse group. So as soon as they get here, we help them understand the neurodiversity of the campus in the context of their first generation experience. We create resources for the first generation students, all of them. They know they're in the same situation. They have that basic thing as a similarity and a commonality, and they carry that with them through, but as they carry it with them throughout, they're carrying with them neurodiversity interactions. So a group like that, that's one way. That's a small way from the beginning. The other is to have the university do a little bit more work to have people attend diversity and inclusion experiences. Students, it is true, my students tell me, Dr. Nacoste, if you had not assigned this, I would not have gone, but I'm glad you did. We're an educational institution, so put it into the education. Mandate that faculty have to have certain kinds of, give credits to certain kinds of things. Whatever the course is. It can be physics, it doesn't matter. So they're just small things that the university can do that starts bringing different people into the same spaces to interact.
And I also think that it also comes from the student as well, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That, you know, when you get to college, it's this, you know, new space. A lot of people start growing within their own identity. And I certainly saw that with a lot of my peers at NC State. And, you know, one of the interesting things was that for my history requirements, I refused to take US history. So I actually took African-American, you know, FM History 1 and then FM History 2. I think they changed the numbers now, but, and I was the only non-Black person in those classes. And so Dr. Johnson, she was actually a professor, I don't know if you know her, she was also a professor at Central. And, you know, one of the things that she would, at the beginning, she was like, you know, I really applaud you for being in this class. And she asked me in front of the class. And again, I was shy, it was my first semester at NC State. And she asked me, she was like, you know, what compelled you to register for this class? Because you're the first time that I have a non-Black person in African-American history class. Wow. And I said, well, because I want to be taught the truth. And the truth is certainly in line with my history of being Puerto Rican and the history of slavery and the history of overcoming. And, obviously it's not to say that everything, in Black history, but like I explained to her, I was like, in 1964, Martin Luther King went to Puerto Rico and he was fighting alongside with Pedro Albizu Campo, like with a lot of our fighters for nationalism and for freedom. And when you look at some of even the pictures of Dr. Martin Luther King, I actually have one as my background here, when he's marching, the Afro Boricuas that were with him, and so that's, something that people sometimes don't realize. And so I took that choice and I took that chance, but it was also because of my upbringing in the military household, where when I grew up, everyone around me was very different. And I grew up in Germany and then North Carolina and then Puerto Rico. But then when I came to NC State, it was a very different experience for me, because then again, I became the minority, but I wanted to be told the truth and I wanted to be taught the truth. And so I made that choice, but I don't think that a lot of people have that opportunity or have that even like, oh, is that even a choice for me to take, right? And so I think that also should be given as an opportunity for students to say, hey, anyone can register for this class. These are general electives. And so I would actually recommend one of your classes or a class around neurodiversity or diversity, equity, and inclusion as a requirement for every student that comes to campus. I mean, they have, things about time management. They have, things about finance, and this is certainly something that's important. And so along those lines, looking at higher education, how do you think that institutions could do a better job of really having this type of like training or conversations around neurodiversity when it comes to the admissions process? As far as reading the application, as far as recruiting students in conversations?
Well, that's a problem. Here's the problem with that. And this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, what you said, given issues of background. One of the things that people underestimate is the fact that we are still a segregated society. So students come to our campus, you said it's up to the student, but so many of our students come to campus, but they're coming from schools where pretty much it was predominantly white because of the past history of segregation. Neighborhood schools are segregated. People want to deny that, but they are. Now that's changing, but they are, which means the students come to our campus with no diversity experience at all. And the research is very clear. People without diversity experiences immediately experience anxiety on a campus like ours. And so they shy away. They don't go to events. They don't think about taking this. So universities have to take that into account, not just in the admissions process, but again, as soon as they get here. But again, in the admissions process, you should look for what they write about, not just their scores. There was the other thing you were saying. I lost something.
It was about the background.
Yeah, there was something else, but I'll have to come back to it. So going to events, creating events, diversity and inclusion. Again, we have to help people. No, that's not what I wanted to say. I already said that. I lost it.
No problem. There'll be other questions and we still have some time. And so kind of looking, I know we kind of talked about, like upbringing, we talked about politics, about higher education. One of the questions also provided was, any advice for starting a type of committee to raise cultural awareness or discuss neurodiversity in a corporate setting? I know you mentioned you recently been at so many different, corporate events. Would love to hear maybe some advice or some of those talks, what came out of those talks that you were a part of?
Yeah, actually a couple of them are coming up, but two things. One is the leadership has to be invested. And in both instances that I've mentioned, it was the leadership that said, oh my God, we've got to do something. Oh, that's what I got. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Getting people to take the courses, like a history course. So two things to say about that. One is that it's changed. Students not only have more opportunities, but students are actually taking those courses, a mix of students. I've had students who are in my course at the same time they're taking an African American history course. I always have to tell them okay, one of the things that they're having trouble with is not the material itself, but what they're learning and the fact that they didn't know any of this. So I say, okay, calm down, because then they start getting angry. Okay, it's like, okay, no, nobody told me the truth until now. Okay, so that's changed. The other thing that's changed is the political environment is actually pushing students to take these kinds of courses. My enrollment went from around 50 to 55. It was the summer of 2017. I was at home, like I am now, and I said, oh, let me check the enrollment. It was middle of the summer. I said, let's see what's going on. And it was 80 students. And it's been 80 students ever since. So the political environment has made students go, wait, what is happening? I need to learn something. So there is a change going on, but we can't just leave it up to that. But I do want to, but you're right about saying that it really, the students have to have some initiative. But we have to be careful about how we label these courses. I mean, they're young people, so the labels matter. And sometimes it's important to have a requirement, but also trying to make us, too often universities make it sound as if these are specialized courses that only people who are majoring in Africana studies should, it's like, no, but that's the way universities have operated. And that's a problem. Now back to corporate.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I know we're talking about a lot of different things, so this is fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, corporate, the leadership has to be invested. They have to want something to happen. They have to believe that they need some help. And in both instances, that's what has happened. They have a committee, the Birmingham, Alabama Hometown Lenders, the committee, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. What's interesting about that committee is it's all white people. It's like, okay, y'all might want to work on a little bit of a, but at least they're working on it. At least they're working on it and they're reaching out. And then they want to know how to encourage their employees. And that's when I can talk about what neodiversity really is and that it can cause anxiety. And I have to talk about it in a way that lets people into the conversation. So I stay away from certain buzzwords, but I do say things like, never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. There are no innocent. I get people away from the idea that they have to be perfect, that they can't make mistakes. And then I try to help the organization understand that you have to give people room to make these certain kinds of mistakes.
Thank you. Something that's really interesting is that I do a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion workshops for higher education, specifically within marketing, as far as how the messaging is sent. Again, kind of going back to the point, and I know you mentioned this before about, communication and the importance of listening, not just to listen to respond, but to listen to actually understand, right? And so, one of the interesting things is that, now with, let's say, for example, with Black Lives Matter, with Breonna Taylor, all of these organizations were, had these statements and, 4 to 6 months later, there's really nothing to back up what those statements said, right? Like, we will support, we will, uplift voices of people of color, we will. And so how do we as professionals, or even as customers of certain organizations, really speak up and really hold these organizations accountable outside of the cancel culture, which I know is something else that is touched upon in other parts of the book. But really, what can we do to say, we gave you time. What's going on? What now?
Well, it's so interesting. It is so interesting that so many organizations just panicked, found a way that we got to say something. And that's a panicked response. What they didn't have was an infrastructure to go along with that. So if you're going to make a symbolic statement, that's fine. But the real question is, what's your infrastructure for moving that as an agenda? And that's the question we have to ask. Where's your infrastructure? And I don't mean just saying you have a diversity and inclusion committee. I mean, What are the activities that you set up for your organizational members? What is your outreach activities that support the community? So you see what I'm getting at? Concrete activity, not just we believe in Black Lives Matter. Yeah, well, I believe that too, but what are you doing? And so we have to ask about the infrastructure, and we have to ask about the activity agenda.
Thank you. So actually, we have an attendee that would like for you to clarify your comment about there are no innocents.
Oh, yeah. Please. So one of the things that's going on in America, I've been doing this for a long time. I was trained as a racial awareness group facilitator by the United States Navy. And one of the things you want to do is find a way to bring people into the conversation. So for example, one of the things I stay away from is talking about white privilege. Now, people get really confused when I say I'm not going to talk about that. They think I said there's no such thing. That's not what I said. There are legacies of racism that give advantages to white people. But the concept, it's not even a concept. The phrase white privilege has been used as an attack tool. So it pushes people away from the conversation. What part of what people are saying is you have tendencies that might be called prejudice and bigotry. Well, what I say is everybody has those. There are no innocent. There's no one in America, actually no one in the world, but there's no one in America without a stereotype. You don't always know you have one, but you have been socialized to be an American, and part of that socialization is how to think about groups. No one is absolved of that. I include myself in that. So here's one of the stories I tell later in the book. I was having, I tell it in this section, language matters. I was there's a person in Raleigh who uses a wheelchair that I interact with. We just not hang out, but we see each other in bookstores and libraries. We're both readers. Say, hey, how's it going? How's it going? One time he said, we should just get together and have a beer. And I said, you're right. So we got together to have a beer. So we go to a place to have a beer, and the place has stools, high stools. So I sit on the stool, and then I watch him navigate the stool, going from a wheelchair to the stool. And he uses his upper body, very strong man, you can see, and he lifts himself up and his lower legs don't work. So there he is, and we're talking, and he asked me about neurodiversity. He says, so where'd you get the idea, Professor? I said, well, I've seen a lot of change at NC State. I've seen a lot of change in the world, but think about it. I grew up in the Jim Crow South, so I've seen this go from segregation to desegregation. Then at NC State, when I got here, there were 23% of the student body was women, but now it's 50%. We didn't have a disability resource. We didn't have a GLBT center. We didn't have this, we didn't have that. And then I said, we didn't have a disability resources office, but now we do. And we accommodate to all kinds of students' physical limitations. I said, I even have students in my class who I accommodate to who are wheelchair bound. And when I said wheelchair bound, his whole body shifted. And I just shut the hell up because I realized I had stepped in it. And I waited. And he looked at me calmly, but fiercely, and said, I am not wheelchair bound. I use a wheelchair. I'm like, And I said, thank you. The language I was using was based on a stereotype that people who use wheelchairs, they got no choice. They're wheelchair bound. And that's who they are. Oh, no. Did I know I had that stereotype? Nope. But it came flying out of my mouth under the right conditions. There are no innocent. None.
Thank you. So this one's an interesting one. I know we still have about 10 minutes or so, but from William Hunter, he asked, or he comments and then asked, suppose you are on a 3-hour plane flight seated next to a talkative Trump supporter. How would you handle that? And so I have to ask this question because I'm curious too. How would you handle that?
How would I handle it? Well, probably the Trump, okay, this is a flippant answer first. I'll do the flippant answer. The Trump supporter is not going to speak to me. So that's that. Look, okay, you can't see me. You can see my dark skin and all that, but you can't see that I'm 6'3", 265-pound, broad-shouldered black man. He's not going to bother me. But that's not what you're asking me. What you're asking me is, what if this person starts spouting opinions and so on and so on? 3-hour flight. I'll give people room to have civil conversations, but I'm not putting up with bullshit. If I cannot express myself and you listen, I am not going to listen to you. I don't have to. So don't get confused. We're always working towards civil conversations. I'm not trying to convince anybody that they should believe a certain thing. When people try that with me, I shut them down. And you should shut them down.
Absolutely. Again, it takes me a moment. I know my weakness. So like I mentioned before, instead of going from 0 to 100, I take a pause. And I think that comes with maturity, and it also comes from, mistakes from my past. And so I think that that's certainly important, right? There is no innocent, but I think there is power in understanding like how you would react and just taking a moment to just pause.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because there's power in understanding your interpersonal power. Nobody has to interact with anybody if they don't want to. That's interpersonal power. We make choices. And so when people want to interact with you, it's because they want to interact with you. Now, they may have inappropriate ways of doing that, and you need to manage that and help them understand who you are. That part is your responsibility. If they can't handle that, your power is to say, well, it was nice talking to you.
Absolutely. And so another question that I had, and it also kind of goes with a few of the questions that have been, posed here in the Q&A area. When we talk about bringing your authentic self, especially in a corporate setting, I'll also tell just a quick story. My first gig right out of college, NC State, it was actually at another institution, which will remain unnamed. And one of the first things that we had to do, I was the recruiter, so we had to do like kind of a mock presentation, how we would, approach students and so on. And so I did the presentation, and, some of the feedback was, you need to speak a little slower, which I get. I speak very quick, fast. It's something that I certainly try to work on. But one of the comments, and this was in front of the entire staff, a few comments that they mentioned was, you need to lose your accent. Because we're serving a certain population. And so they need to see someone that sounds like them. And then one of the leadership, people in leadership role then said, the same goes for your hair. We need you to look kept. And again, this was in the mid 2000s, but one of the things is that this still happens today.
Oh, yeah.
As far as, looking, apart. And again, this was my first gig right out of college. So to me, it was like, well, I have to, cross my hands, and I have to be quiet, and I have to do what I say. This is my first job. I'm just learning. And I think that there's power in really understanding authentic self. As I mentioned earlier, now I actually make a point to wear, things that are ethnic, right? Like my earrings are from an artisan in Puerto Rico, because it also helps when people ask me to tell my story, and it also allows them to learn about my background as well. And so I would love to hear your feedback, not just for our current students that are, learning to navigate a corporate world, but even for anyone that's listening today or that will see this video on YouTube, like the power of authenticity as, really standing your grounds within your own power as being a person of color, of being a woman of color, especially in a corporate setting. I would love, any feedback or any advice that you have.
Well, here's the thing. I know this is difficult, but when you're being interviewed, you are also interviewing them. So one of the things is, if they have that kind of standard, you have to decide whether you can live with that. Mm-hmm. Being the authentic self means just what it says, being the authentic self. So here's an interesting story. I was the first vice provost for diversity and African American affairs. And at that point, I had gotten a small collection of these shirts from Ghana, West Africa, that I wear. I had some formal ones, informal ones. So when I went to work as the diversity officer, this is what I wore. I was wearing it anyway, but I was continuing to do that. I literally had a hallway introduction where a senior administrator is introducing me to some alumnus benefactor, I don't know. And he's introducing me, I'm Dr. Rupert Nacoste, da, da, da. And he literally looked at me and he said, and look how he dresses. I was like, I'm the diversity officer. You think I'm supposed to fit in the mold of everybody else? I mean, but even if I wasn't the diversity officer, I was being myself. I was clean cut, well dressed, da 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 da. But I was too African. So you always have to figure out what the standard is and figure out whether that's a place you can work. Here's another story for you. I'm a Louisiana Black Creole. I'm a storyteller, as you've noticed, Lyndenise. And when I teach, my teaching is storytelling teaching. I embed concepts in stories. But I also, as a Creole, you see me, I'm doing it even when we're on Zoom, my body is all over the place, right? You've seen this? So I gave one of my first formal practice talks at the University of Michigan as I was about to go on the job market. And I was sitting in front of all of the major professors who wanted to help me figure out how to do a job talk. And at the end of my job talk, they told me, you move around too much. You got to stand behind the podium because that just doesn't look right. I was like, and I literally tried it on one job market, on one job interview, and it was the worst talk I've ever given in my life. It was the worst thing. And I just completely ignored that from that point on. And my style is my style. This is who I am. And trust me, clearly I have had a successful career with this style. I mean, I have won every major teaching award this university offers. I have won national awards. It works. What people are afraid of is they've got in their heads, too many corporate people have in their heads a particular model. And people say they want diversity and inclusion, but you can't have inclusion by telling people who to be.
Absolutely. And I think we're here wrapping up shortly, but Dr. Nacoste, just on a personal note, I just want to say thank you so much. You know, your books, these sessions, thank you for taking the time for the Alumni Association, for really just allowing us to have this, you know, engaging conversation. I could be here all night. I too, you know, if it weren't for me sitting down and just having my hands here, I too walk around and, you know, and I just think that there's just so much power in these conversations. I know that there's a lot of right now, you know, all the different people that are watching and that will watch, those are the seeds that you'll be planting. And I just want to say that NC State is so fortunate to have you as such a voice, such a leader. Our students are lucky to have you. I wish, you know, you could have been my professor when I was there, but I feel like this is a class in itself. And so I also feel like one of your students. So I just want to say a heartfelt thank you from all of us, representing not just the Latinx Alumni Network, but also the Alumni Association, the Black Alumni Society. I know Sam is here as well. You know, we couldn't be who we are today without someone like you. And we are essentially a reflection of the legacy of those that fought before us. And you continue to fight for us. And, you know, and that's really why I recruit students for NC State, why we launched the Alumni Network, because I believe that because of people like you, NC State will continue to become a safe place for students, specifically students of color. And that's the part of inclusion that's important for our students. So I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Well, I enjoyed you, Lyndenise. I enjoyed you very much.
Thank you. And yeah, this has been amazing. And I certainly look forward to, you know, the next session. And so thank you to everyone and Dr. Nacoste, and I'll hand it over back. I know I can continue to talk all night, but thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. I will definitely double down on that. Thank you, Lyndenise. Thank you, Dr. Nacoste, for taking the time to engage in such important and intentional conversation. Thank you all for joining us on behalf of the NC State Alumni Association. This is your friendly reminder that we'll be back here again, same crew, on October 27th at 6:30 p.m. Registration is going to keep staying open. We have 3 more sessions to go. So if you've really enjoyed this and you want to share it with friends, family, coworkers, please continue to do so. I will continue to send out the recordings after the fact. And again, we are just so grateful to have you. Good night and go Pack.
Good night.
Go Pack.